Hi guys, welcome to Suburban Cauldron. I'm Amethyst, and today we're going to take a look at the new moon that is quickly approaching. If you do some research and you look through and you're trying to figure out what work do I need to do for which moon phase, you'll notice that the full moon itself gets a lot of the celebrity when it comes to specifics on work. Each full moon every month gets its own name. There's different energies that go along with it and different energy themes as far as the work that you're doing. For example, last month we just did the February full moon, which is the snow moon. We did purification and some self-reflecting along with our French onion bake. And but next month is going to be something a little bit different, right? The new moon is at least equally as powerful as the full moon. It just tends to get that secondary backup role because of the fact that it comes with the dark. So a lot of times people associate energy and power with light, which is what the full moon brings us, especially in a society that doesn't have nighttime technology. So if we can do things by the light of the full moon, that provides more time and more production. But the dark of the moon provides at least as much power for us because there is an equality and a balance between light and dark. So the new moon is very powerful, and it's probably going to get close to as much information on working and doing spells and doing work during the new moon. It just doesn't have a new name every month, and there's not necessarily a theme. There's kind of a generalized work that we do. So as we move forward through our channel and through our episodes, you'll see a series of different full moon episodes that we do, but we're only going to focus like one or two of these on the actual new moon. And that's just simply because there's more of a generalized work and energy work that we do for the new moon. So moving forward from here, don't forget that if you're enjoying our channel, please remember to like and subscribe down below. Share us with your friends because we love to have new friends here over at the Suburban Cauldron, and we love to enjoy and we're having a really good time. So for your new moon, the work that you're going to do, and remember that this is an esbat, so we're going to make it a full ritual. We're going to cast circle, we're going to call in quarters, but it's not necessarily one of the quote unquote high holidays, which is where, you would do kind of a simple ritual. You might do a little bit of work, but it's more focused on celebrating what's happening for the wheel of the year. And then you kind of feast with your group. The esbats, you definitely celebrate the phase of the moon that you're facing, but at the same time, this is a good time to do some magical work. So for your new moon, the work that we're doing is focused predominantly around new beginnings and a fresh start to things. So you'll talk to people about, hey, I have this spell that I want to work and I've got all my stuff together. I'm just not really sure where I want to fit it in my calendar. New moon, because that's when we want to start things. You'll see people, if you're an herbalist or an apothecary, you may start your tinctures or some of your brews on the new moon just to give them that little bit of oomph of power for that new beginning. And then, of course, if you have any household projects that you're looking forward to getting started on the new moon, is to sit down and plan your vacation time. This is a really good time because ultimately on the dark of the moon, with that new moon, you get a blank slate. This is the perfect time to just launch into new things, especially something that's going to take a little while to manifest. So because when the full moon does come along in a couple of weeks, this is a good time to either wrap up the spell that we're finishing up, or it's a good time to reestablish that energy and reboost and recommit to the spell that you're working. So with the new moon, this is a really good time to just get those things started. So as we work tonight with our new moon, the supplies that you need are going to be very specific to you, and they're very individualized. So if you have a brew or a tincture that you're making, you're going to need to gather the supplies that you're going to need to build that. If you're working on a manifestation spell, you're going to need the things that will help you manifest whatever it is that you're working towards. If you have projects that you're working on and maybe you just want to sit down and brainstorm, you'll need your blank notebook so you can just start to brainstorm those things. Or if you're just past that step but not quite into the real planning phase or the real action phase, get your day planner out and start putting some of those dates in there and start making dates for yourself. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at for the new moon. If you really don't have anything prepped and you're really not sure what to do, that's totally fine. The new moon is going to come anyway. So this is a really good time for a little bit more self-reflection and some more meditation time. So really, this is a good night to communicate with deity and just kind of, again, thank them for being with us all the time. We're still going to call in quarters. We can even talk to the quarter guards about what are some things that I can do to take a step towards helping with climate, helping with the environment, helping with some sort of cause that you feel passionately about. Just the meditation, it works really well. And I always like, when I'm doing a meditation on the new moon, I just grab a black candle to sit with, and just, it helps me to focus my meditation, but also it helps me to feel in that magical space. So if that's all you're working on, that's fine. That's all you're going to need. So when it comes to gathering supplies, it's very specific to whatever you are working on tonight. How does this tie into the kitchen? That's the big question. What we're working on today, what we're going to build today, is not a full meal. I know I've got a bunch of stuff sitting here and it looks like we are getting crazy with things, and we are, but we're not building a full meal, and we're not even making a side, and we're not even building a dessert. What we're doing is we're going to create something that takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of extra effort. And even when we finish and we open circle back up, this is not going to be finished, because it's going to be just like our spells and just like our tinctures and all of the things that we start on the new moon. It's going to take a little while to manifest and create itself. So what we're doing is we're building an ingredient that goes in almost all of our recipes in the kitchen. It kind of becomes what some people would call the liquid gold of the kitchen, because it just stays there and we use it for everything. And we are working on a new moon, new beginning chicken broth. Okay. So we're getting excited because, again, the chicken broth, it goes in soups, it goes in stews. We will use it to deglaze pans. We'll use it to work as a reduction. And all of these things are going to use this broth base. You know, it's really easy to just run to the store and grab a box of chicken broth off of the shelf. It's there, it makes it easy. And I will tell you, a lot of times I always have chicken broth in my pantry. If I don't, then it is one of the first things that goes on the grocery list. However, with your commercial chicken broths, they tend to be a little more on the salty side, and they tend to have a little bit of a higher fat content. The salt is A, for flavor, and B, for preservative, because it does need to have a little bit of a longer shelf life. But also the fat goes in there as a big flavor booster, but it also is very aromatic. So as fat cooks is where the good smell comes from. So it gets people excited about buying their product. When you make this at home, and I've had a lot of people talk about, man, as soon as I switched to making broth at home, I've not gone back. It's a little bit, it's not even labor intensive, because ultimately once we get this done, it's super easy to do, but it's patient intensive, where you just have to wait, because it does take several hours to cook and boil down and do what it's going to do. But once you establish that, hey, this is also my time to work on a spell or to work on something around the house, or even if the kids have a day off of school and you're just trying to find somebody that's willing to babysit a pot, if they can do that, then this works great. Okay. So once you start doing that, I've had a lot of people say, I have never gone back to commercial broth, because the homemade stuff is so much better and it's so much more flavorful without being too salty. So that's something that we're real excited about. So what you will need for your new moon broth is you will need chicken. That's the first one, obviously. And what I've got here is it's a young whole chicken that I got from the grocery store. You can buy these really easy. They're in with all of the rest of the chicken. They come packaged up, and it's the whole bird. I have gone ahead and quartered this guy out, and I did pull all of the skin off. We'll talk about why no skin in a little while. And I'm not going to get into the cuts that you need to quarter him out, because it just takes a little bit more time. There are some really fantastic videos on where and how to cut. If you've not done this before, as soon as you open up that little package and the little bird comes out, it becomes very intimidating. I will tell you, it's a series of about 4 to 6 cuts, and you've got them split out. Okay, so don't panic. It's really easy to do, especially if you find a really great video on YouTube. Go to YouTube University. It'll teach you all the things you need to know. Okay, so I've gone ahead and split him out. So we got our chicken, and he was probably 4, almost 5 pounds. Okay, so that's going to work really well. And then on top of that, I've got a couple of ribs of celery. I do have the leaves in here. You'll see that. I've got some of the celery leaves in here. And I've got a couple of carrots and some onions. And I've quartered my onions out. If you notice, you guys, everything is cut into really, really big chunks and big pieces. And that's really because once this goes in the broth and it boils down, I don't care, because I'm gonna filter everything out at the end of the procedure, and these big pieces aren't gonna matter. Okay, so those are the big parts. I do have a couple of cloves of garlic that I've just cut into some bigger chunks that I'm going to throw in there, and I've got about 6 to 8 peppercorn. There it is, the little round balls that go in your pepper grinder. I've got a couple of those that we're just going to throw on top. The other things I have are some fresh herbs. I've got parsley, I've got thyme, and I've got sage here with me. That's what I'm going to put in mine. As a side note, as you are getting ready and learning how to cook and talking to people about cooking, you may hear a weird term that goes by and it'll confuse you a little bit. It's mirepoix. It's a French word, and it basically is defined as your kitchen staple ingredients. So a mirepoix is your carrots, celery, and onion, and parsley. That just seems to go in most dishes as a base to start with, along with our chicken broth later on, right? So if you hear that term, that's what we're talking about. Or if you read up on different chicken broths or different things that says you need your mirepoix, that's what we're talking about. Carrots, celery, onion, parsley. Okay. In addition to that, like I said, I'm adding in thyme and sage because thyme is a really fantastic herb. It provides quite a bit of flavor, and it does have that purifying factor to it. And sage because, as we've mentioned before, we put sage in everything over here, right? So we're going to put all of these things in our pot and get them going. And this is the easiest part to the broth, okay? So with that, we're going to move our pot over. All right, so we're going to get everything in the pot. As I put things in the pot, you're going to have to kind of work it around a little bit to get things in here so they all fit along the bottom. And then you're going to add your vegetables up on top. And guys, everything's going in here, bones and all. So you'll notice even this guy, this is the back spine to the chicken. He's going in here as well because that's where all of the good, tasty flavor is in those bones. All right, so we're going to put all of this in there. I'm going to talk in a little bit once we get this on the stove about meat versus not meat, bones versus no bones, and roasted versus not roasted. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. The big thing is I have skinned my bird. The reason that you skin him is because the skin, yes, there's a debate ultimately about the skin, right? So there's a lot of people that will say, no, you want to leave the skin on because that's where all the fat and the flavor is. They're absolutely right. However, with that fat, when you're building your broth, you're also going to end up with a lot of the fat on top, and that likes to emulsify and kind of incorporate itself into the liquid, which means on the other end, when you start using your broth, you get kind of a greasier flavor and a greasier feel in your mouth and on your hands and all of that. And it can be like even on the edge of unpleasant as you are trying to consume that and eat that later on. So I lean in the direction of no skin. There are a lot of other people that will say, no, leave the skin on. But I have taken the skin off of my little guy. So we're going to add our garlic cloves in here. And our peppercorns go on top, and then we're just going to throw in a sprig or two of your parsley, just something to add some flavor in there. Ooh, that guy's real major. He's intense. All right, we'll throw him in there, and then we'll do a couple of sprigs of thyme and a couple of sage. Once all of this is done, we're just going to fill it with cold waters to start, and we're just going to fill that up to cover all of the solids in my pot. My pot's a little smaller this time, which is going to be okay. We'll get there. It'll boil itself down a little bit, but we do want enough water to cover over the top of everybody. That's a pretty intense bit of sage there as well. Okay, I'm going to put some cold water on this. Once I get that on, we're going to put it on the stove, and we're going to start it on warm. The reason I put it in cold water first and then I start to warm it up is the same reason that I avoid that skin. The fat that is incorporated into everything, if you start with warm water, it immediately starts to emulsify and denature itself and create its own part of the broth, and then you end up with that weird greasy feel on the other end. So you want to start with cold water and gradually let it warm. Once you get to a simmer where it's not quite a rolling boil, but it's almost there, that's where we're going to turn our heat down to a low medium. So we just keep it that simmer. If it starts to boil and it boils for too long, you get that same thing. You get the fat that starts to denature, it becomes a part of your broth, and now you end up with, a greasy feel on the other end. I'm going to get this on the stove, and then I want to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about, well, aren't we doing a moon ritual at the same time? So we'll be right back. All right, guys, while things are on the stove and they're simmering, they're going to be there for a while. So I wanted to touch base on a couple of things really quickly that are common questions that come up when it comes to making your chicken broth. The first one being the biggest and most common question that a lot of people get is, what is the difference between broth and stock? And that, a lot of times we don't even think about it until we have a recipe that we're working with. We've run to the store, we grabbed a box off the shelf, we got it home, and we looked at it, and it's different than what the recipe is calling for. The recipe calls for chicken broth. What we grabbed was chicken stock, or vice versa. So what's the big difference? Honestly, don't panic over this. You're going to be able to use them interchangeably for the most part. The biggest difference between broth versus stock is that when you are making stock, you are actually using the bones themselves to create that liquid, okay? And at the end of everything, if you've used just the bones, what you get when you're making it at home is kind of almost like a jelly-like consistency. And that jelly it even wiggles like Jello, okay? And that it really is because you have pulled the collagen and the gelatin out of the bones themselves, and that's what's in the liquid. And that's what gives it that jelly consistency. The biggest difference between using the bones and then when you make a broth using the meat, and that's the big difference, is when you make broth, you're using the meat of the bird. You end up with more of a chicken flavor in your broth. Okay. So, and you don't get as much of that wiggly jelly consistency unless you put bones in it. Okay. So if you're using just the meat, you get this beautiful gold liquid that just has that really great chickeny flavor. Whereas if you're using your stock, depending on the bones that you use, you get either a brown or a gold color, but you also get less of the chicken flavor in it, and you get all of the nutrients in it that makes it a good stock to use and a good ingredient to use in a lot of your recipes. Okay, so that's the biggest difference. The next biggest difference that you'll see, and the question that a lot of people ask, is what's the difference between brown broth and yellow broth? A lot of people think it's the difference between beef versus chicken. And although that can sometimes be true, ultimately when we're talking specifically chicken broth, the difference there is roasted bones versus not roasted bones. Okay, so when you roast the meat and you roast the bones first, what comes out after you've gone through everything and it is simmered forever is a is a brown liquid, okay? And that is going to give you that roasted flavor. Think of it kind of like, it's not necessarily heavy chicken, but it is a roasted meat flavor. And it's something that triggers the brain to go, ooh, this is going to be super tasty. So much so that it's almost like when you're at a Mexican restaurant, you're super full, you're just waiting for the check, and somebody walks by with a smoking, steaming fajita, and it does not matter how full you are instantly ready to eat said fajita if they would just bring that over here, please, right? It's kind of that trigger in the brain that says, I don't care what I just ate. That smells awesome, and I'm ready to eat that again. That's the roasted meat flavor that you get. It doesn't trigger like, ooh, there was roasted chicken in here. It's just a roasted meat flavor, and it's really, really tasty in a lot of those, as a base of a lot of your recipes. So that's why we like the roasted ones, and that comes out as a brown broth. The yellow broth is just using the same ingredients. You just haven't roasted the meat. You haven't roasted the bones first. So you get kind of that yellowy, a lot of times they call it a blonde broth. A lot of people like to use buzzwords, so they'll call it the liquid gold. And that's what we're doing. We're making some liquid gold to keep on our fridge because we're going to use this for everything. But that blonde color comes from not roasting the bones first. All right. The next question that I get a lot, or that I see a lot, is, well, can I just use the old carcass off of my turkey or a rotisserie chicken or something like that? The answer to that is absolutely yes. As a matter of fact, that is why I'm kind of here, kind of as a side note, talking to you a little bit right now, is because although you watched us put our ingredients together and put everything in the pot, you saw that as a whole chicken. You saw the big pieces that we had not roasted. What I've actually done is I've purchased a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store along with all of that. And what I'm going to do is pull the meat off of this and put it in a bowl and set it aside and save it to use in other recipes. But then I'm going to use the bones from my roasted chicken to start a smaller batch of roasted bone brown broth. Now, here's the thing. When you roast this, a lot of the goodness that you want to come out in your stock has already gone into the meat of the roasted chicken, okay? You will see some recipes and you'll see some directions on how to make your own stock where they pull all the meat off and then they just roast the bones. That is perfectly fine. You can absolutely do that. And that's the thing with this, you guys. A lot of people get, almost gatekeepy with how you make your stock, and yet there are so many different options, and it really comes down to personal flavor and what you're looking for in your stock. So at the end of this, because these things take so long, I've started this. It is right now 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm just about to get this on the stove, and this is going to cruise throughout the day so that we can do the rest of our recording a little bit later. But that means that you're going to see me pull out just bones out of a pot later on down the road. And you're going to go, well, what happened to all the meat? Well, this is a different chicken. All of that meat that we put in the pot on video is still on the stove. And right now, what we're pulling out is just going to be the bones. So when it comes to, can I use a rotisserie chicken? Can I use the carcass of my turkey? Absolutely. Here's the thing. You don't get as much. So if you're going to do that, my suggestion, and a lot of home cook suggestions will be, and a really great kitchen hack, is that you get a Ziploc bag, and every time you have a rotisserie chicken, you put those bones and the leftover carcass, you pull as much meat off as you can, you put the leftover bones and carcass in a Ziploc bag, and you put that in your freezer. And once you get to a point where you have 2 to 3 carcasses worth, I would say, it kind of depends on how much you want to make. As soon as you get enough, you can then put that in your pot and make your stock out of that. That way you get a little bit more of the collagen and the protein and everything coming out of those bones to make the proper amount of stock than you would if you use just one, okay? I'm just using the one for today just to give us kind of the idea of what we're working on. You're still gonna add your vegetables, your carrot, your celery, your onion, your herbs. You're still gonna add all of that in there, but you're just not gonna get as much. The other part of this, you'll hear a lot of people talk about, you can also put a lot of your kitchen scraps as far as, vegetable peel, like carrot peels, the ends of the celery, or even the heart of the celery that nobody wants to use except to put it in a Bloody Mary. You can put that in your Ziploc bag and pop that in the freezer. And then that way, when it comes time to make your stock, you're not using fresh whole vegetables that feel like you're wasting them, right? Because at the end of this, they're just a little too mushy to put in much else. But you can use these vegetable pieces that will still be good enough to throw in your stock. They still have enough flavor to go in there. It's just not the parts that you necessarily want to eat, which is great because with stock, we're going to pull all of that stuff out anyway. Okay, so you get the flavor and you're not wasting as much. So that is the biggest thing with wasting versus not wasting. A lot of people will tell you, well, if you don't pull the meat off and you throw it in the pot and you just let it boil like we did, you're going to end up with a situation where it feels very wasteful because you feel like you can't use that meat. You can. It's a personal preference thing. The thing is as this boils for that long, it's going to go a really long time and you end up with a potentially very dry meat. But if you pull that out and you shred it, it goes really great in chicken salads, if you mix it with other things and you can add some moisture to it, it's going to be fine. And it's going to taste just as good as the regular pieces of meat. But a lot of people don't like to use that. So then they feel like it's wasteful. That's where you cut the meat off, set that aside, cook it somewhere else, and just use the bones. It really, really, really is a matter of personal preference. So that's where we're going with this. I'm going to go ahead and pull this chicken apart and get these things on the stove, and we'll be back as we pull all the chicken out. But I'm going to do kind of a quick still shot just to kind of show you what I'm putting in and what I'm not putting in. All right, guys, I did pull this chicken apart, and I got to mention that I know I said that I would just pop in a still shot here, but I did want to actually talk about this just a little bit as to what's going on here. So in my bowl, I've got all of the meat that I have pulled off of that chicken to put in salads and soups and whatever else I want to use it for. That's going to have all that tasty rotisserie chicken flavor. Next to it is the pile of bones. This is actually what I'm going to add in here. And you'll notice that there are definitely some areas that have a little bit of meat left on it, but like you've got your drumsticks in here. I've even got the ribs, a little bit of ribs. If you look really close, I've got some areas of spine is in here as well. That's this friend here. He's got a big piece of spine. So that is my pile of bones that I'm going to put in the pot to simmer down and create my stock with. There are little bits of meat. That's going to give me some of that chickeny flavor that I really love and that I really want. I could probably pull a little bit of more meat. I think this guy got missed. Yeah, see that big piece of meat that's on there? I'm going to pull him off and put that in the bowl. But the other little bits are going to provide some of that flavor that I'm looking for down the road. And then you'll see next to it is just my pile of skin. And as we talked about earlier, there is that big debate on skin versus not skin. This skin is where the fat lives, and it provides a lot of fat to your stock. And what you end up with is a very greasy feel when you are eating your recipe later. And that is something that we want to try to avoid just because it can feel kind of weird in your mouth. However, some people really like that flavor. They don't care about the feel. So that is a matter of personal preference as to skin versus not skin. All right, so we're going to continue to simmer the rest of our stock, and we will be back and once that's ready to come off. Thanks. All right, we'll be back here in just a few. All right, guys, this is at a boil. You can see how I've got a rolling boil going here. That's a little higher than I want, so I've just turned my heat down to low because I want this to get to where it's just at a simmer. A short boil like that is okay, but I don't want to leave it there too long. The other thing you'll notice is these little bits of foam that are starting to pop up in little areas. That's fat that's coming out of the chicken and out of the bones. I want to kind of skim that off of the top. And I'm just going to put that in a side dish that we're actually going to go ahead and get rid of later on, so that that doesn't end up in our broth at the end of things. So again, that's that weird foam that's just up on top. So we're just going to let this simmer along. Come back to this every 20, 30 minutes or so just to check on it and make sure that you have a minute to skim all of that fat off of the top. And then it can just continue to boil on through. All right, guys, so my broth is all done. This has been boiling for about 6 hours, as you saw from the previous little piece. This particular pot is going to be a little bit less just because I only use those bones of that rotisserie chicken. So at this point, it's off of the heat. It's been going for a while. I'm going to go ahead and pull all of the solids out. And then once I finish that, I'm going to pass it through a sieve. You can buy these little tiny filters, the little sieves at the grocery store. They're just a couple of bucks. They just sit over your bowl. And then just as a secondary filter, a lot of people, and I myself, like to put a little cheesecloth down inside your sieve just to kind of help pull the rest of the solids out. If you don't have the cheesecloth, that's fine. You can just pass it through the sieve. You may have to do it a couple of times just to get the last of the bits out. But ultimately, once it goes through there, we should be good to go. I have not tried this with a regular colander and some cheesecloth or any other kind of format, but I imagine you're still going to get some bits because the holes in the colanders are a little too big for what you want. So we're just going to go ahead and get started on that. We're going to pull all of our solids out. You're going to set all of this aside because there's a couple of things that you can do with this. With the pot that we just started with our full body of the chicken that has all the meat in there, you want to set that aside because you can pull all of that meat off and use it in other recipes like salads or wraps, or even put it back in a pot with some more chicken broth and add some more new carrots and celery and make a soup out of it. However you want to do it. Works really nicely for those things. A lot of people, as we mentioned, might say, no, the meat is too dry and too tough. You know, there's a lot of recipes out there where you're adding sauces to it that will kind of help with that moisture factor along the way. So that's okay. It's going to work out fine. So you want to set that meat aside. And then the other thing that you're going to do is you're going to set these aside, and the bones are going to go in the trash once we're done with them and everything's separated out. And that's simply because the biggest thing that I want to kind of send through here is don't give these bones to any of your animals, especially your dogs. These bones have been cooked and they're particularly brittle, and that is when they break and they will splinter and they'll perforate a gut, and that is a life-threatening surgery that nobody wants to deal with at any point. So make sure those bones go straight in the trash. But the rest of your vegetables can go out in your composting bin. This is a good time when you take them out there to say thank you. Thank you for providing your nutrients and the flavor to my broth, but also thank you for continuing to provide nutrients to my garden through the compost bin, whatever it is. Yes, you're thanking carrots for doing their job, but that's what we do as witches. We thank carrots for doing their job. Okay, so we've got all of our solids separated out, and I'm just going to pass it through my sieve. And I'm going to kind of rotate a little bit so you can kind of see a little better what's going on. I'm going to try to do this without burning myself or making a huge mess. So it's just going to go in here, and you'll see there's lots of herbs. You don't want to get too crazy with this and just start splashing, because you don't want to splash anybody and make a big mess. And then there's all the rest of the solids that come out through there. At this point, you don't want to like press this down and really pull, like try to get all of the last bit of moisture through. You have plenty of liquid that is in this bowl and in this dish, and that's going to be fine. That's all you're going to need. All right, so you don't need to necessarily press this down at the end of things. So what I've got is a really fantastic yellow broth that is a really nice yellowy golden color. Okay, what we would do at this point, and what we're going to do, is let this cool down to room temperature. Once it is at room temperature, then I'm going to actually put it in the fridge overnight. And by cooling it like that, what ends up happening is what's left of the fat in my broth is going to float to the surface and solidify. Okay, and in the morning when I come back to it, I'm going to scrape that off with a spoon and pitch that part, because again, that's another thing that's going to give you that weird greasy feeling when you eat it later on if you add it to a recipe. So we're going to get rid of that part so that what we're left with is just a really nice, flavorful broth that we can use in our soups and stews. So that is making your chicken broth. As we separate this out into containers for storage, what I'm probably going to do with this one is put it into a larger container. I actually am probably going to use most of this for tonight's dinner, because I think we're going to have chicken noodle soup, because why wouldn't you? We just made great broth. But if you're not going to use it right away, you can put it into a container. It'll store in the fridge for up to a week to 2 weeks, especially if it's an airtight container. Or you can split this out into smaller containers and freeze it. And you can keep it in the freezer for 3 to 6 months, depending on how much and any inclusions. So now that we've got it all in jars and containers and we've got it stored, this is kind of the direction that we're headed with our broth. We've got to let it cool off and get to that point, which also means the pot that we have started, that is, it's at its simmer back there on the stove, it's going to go for a while. But that doesn't necessarily mean that now that you've done your work and you've done all of your meditating, now you have to sit in your circle for the next 6 hours. You do not have to do that. Please don't. Okay. The whole point to this, and the whole point to the work that we've done for the new moon, is to start something new, is a new, fresh beginning. Okay. So once you've finished your work, feel free to release yourself, release your quarters, let them go back to what they're doing, release Lord and Lady, thank them for their work, and stay if you go, or go if you will, stay if you must. Let them go about doing their things. They've got billions of people to help out in the world, so let them go do that, okay? Release your quarters, release your Lord and Lady, and then open your circle. For me, as we talked about towards the beginning, we talked about what my circle looks like, that orb of dark space. At this point is when my deity shows up and says, here, bing, have some sunlight. So my orb and my circle gets opened by the light that comes from the new planet and the new sun that shows up. It penetrates my circle, and now it's open and yet unbroken, because I'm always with deity, right? So that is where we're going to go with opening our circle and moving forward. So everything is still on the stove, and you kind of think, well, I kind of feel like this is unfinished. That's the point to this. A lot of the work that you just did, you started. Your tinctures are going to take a couple of weeks to ferment. Your manifestation spell is going to take a little while to come to fruition. That's the whole point. So this is very reminiscent of that work that we've done and the spell. So we've finished our work, we've opened our circle, but our broth is still boiling away. Once it's done, we're going to get to this point where we put it in jars and we put it in storage and we can use it later on. But for the most part, where we stop with our work is with it on the stove, and we come back and babysit it throughout the day. I'm going to take some pictures once this is cooled off, just so that you can see that fat that I want to skim off the top later on. And then we're going to put this in storage. I'm going to use some and get started on dinner for tonight. It's probably going to be some chicken soup because we just made new broth, so why wouldn't you? But guys, I really had a good time. I have learned so much about broth and stock and all of the things, and I really enjoy making this myself, so I hope you have as much fun. And as always, merry meet, merry part, and we're going to see you next week, so merry meet again.